Hello and welcome to the Next Gen Racing YouTube channel for a special feature midweek video where we're going to be previewing the Qatar Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. It's the crescendo of the flat season, 15 entries potentially heading to post. Unfortunately, no Sam for this video. He's a very busy man at this moment in time, but we're going to be looking at the main protagonists for the race, looking at potential pace angles and hopefully finding the winner for the 2023 edition of the Qatar Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. The first place to start is looking at the potential pace angles or the lack thereof in this instance. If we look at the arc over the last previous years, of course it has been a stout stamina test. Now looking at this year's contest, it's quite tricky to find the pace angle. It looks like we're going to have good to soft or soft ground come the day, which will probably translate to a going stick reading of about good to soft. There'll be a slight amount of give in the ground, but I know it's very warm over in Paris at the moment, so it wouldn't be surprised if this is the fastest arc that we've seen since 2018 when Enable won it in a very quick time. But no, looking at the pace angle here, there's two that could potentially make the pace, but there are no real front runners. Nesto was very close up in the Irish Champion Stakes last time out, and Mr. Hollywood made all at Baden-Baden last time out, but it was a bit of a muddling tactical affair which Zagre went and won. Of course, he is going out to Hong Kong in December and instead skipping the arc. On that basis, it doesn't look like there's a real front runner in this race, and I don't think it is going to be as stout a stamina test as we have seen in the past. If something does go forward and try and make all and set those quick fractures, then so be it, but I can't really see it. I think a turn of foot and a change of gear is definitely going to be able to decide this, with the ability to stay as well. Of course, there's only one place to start, and that is the unbeaten son of Cracksman, Ace Impact, looking to maintain his unbeaten record in the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. It would be some feat if he were to maintain his unbeaten record there. Stepping up to a mile and a half, I know this can be a little bit of a worry. He doesn't have any form over a mile and a half. He's a son of Cracksman, who himself, of course, did stay a mile and a half. Very versatile ground-wise as well. Ace Impacts look very impressive. I mean, his win in the Prix de Jockey Club, which does look like a very, very good race at this moment in time. The likes of Big Rock, Feed the Flame, even Epictetus, Continuous in behind that day. It was a very quick time. It was a record time. In fact, he showed a beautiful turn of gear. He travelled very strongly that day, but last time out he was a little bit keen. He over raced ever so slightly. He beat Al Riffa with just one tap behind the saddle, and look, I think he's definitely the one to beat. If he was trained by Aidan O'Brien, I wouldn't be surprised if he was around 2-1, 15-8. Jean-Claude Rougy has decided to keep him fresh. Interestingly enough, an interesting little stat is since the Prix de Jockey Club was stepped back to just over that extended mile and a quarter trip, there has been no winner of the Prix de Jockey Club to win the arc that year since 2006. So it's an interesting little stat to go with Ace Impact, but nonetheless, he is a big, big player. Next in the market, we have the 1-2 in this year's King George, Hukum and Westover, who both look the ones to beat on ratings. Hukum, now he's as versatile as they come. I mean, his best form has probably been seen over a mile and a half, but when he won the Coronation Cup last year, beating Pile Driver before he went on to King George success, that was on good ground. He won the Brigadier Gerard this year, beating Desert Crown. He then went on to win the King George. He travelled beautifully. He got a perfect position from Jim Crowley. Unfortunately, of course, Jim Crowley got a ban for that ride that day, but any rain that falls will be a positive to him. He has a change of gear. He looks to have all bases covered. He's very versatile ground-wise. He's going to stay a mile and a half. But for me, it's interesting that Westover is 2.5 points bigger. There was only a head separating them that day. He did over-race ever so slightly in the King George, but if you look at his form this year, it is absolutely top-notch. I mean, his run in the Shima Classic behind Equinox and then Westover in behind Zagre and Mostadaf, who have both gone on to win Group 1 since. I do think that's probably the best race of the year, just over the Prix de Jockey Club at this moment in time. I think the quicker ground won't be an issue whatsoever. He does stay out a mile and a half as well, and he is definitely a big contender. A couple of interesting stats on the pair. No 6-year-old has, of course, ever won the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, and Hukum will be trying to break that stat this year, but he's relatively lightly raced still. Of course, he's a full brother to Baid. The question I find interesting is, if he was to win the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, would he actually overtake Baid as the better sibling? Who knows? And Westover, an interesting stat is that 15 winners of the arc have been beaten in the race in the previous year. Following Save the Last Dance's injury, Continuous was put to the head of the Ballydor contingent for the arc, and it looks like he's going to be supplemented. Will he get his ground? That is the big question. Now, no Ledger winner has gone on to win the arc that year. Nijinsky was even one of those who was beaten, who was second in the arc that year, but Continuous is going to be flying that flag with a quick turnaround after that race. Now, of course, the trip back to a 1.5 miles shouldn't be a problem whatsoever. I think the ground is going to be a slight question mark. I thought it was going to be on his penultimate run when he won at Castleway, but beating Castleway at York, but it looked like he handled that quicker ground. If it does become quicker ground, I do think he is definitely a player. I think the quick turnaround is definitely enough to put me off, though. He's 7-1. I think that's plenty short enough. He has showed that, of course, he is very, very progressive. The trip won't be a problem. Conditions won't be a problem, but that turnaround after a tough race in the St. Leger has to be an issue, and he's trying to do something that no one ever has. I think it's fair to say Feed the Flame was a tad disappointing in the Prix Nil. I mean, it was a muddling race that Fantastic Moon won, and although he was staying on the line, he looked never nearer to challenge Fantastic Moon that day, and I think he is going to have to bounce back to form. If you look at his win in the Grand Prix de Paris, I thought it was a brilliant turn of foot that he showed down the outside there to stay on as well. I think he's definitely going to stay, but if you look at the way Ace Impact toyed with him in the Prix de Jockey Club, I think he does have probably £5 or £6 to find. He's around double figure price now, which is fair enough, but I do think that Feed the Flame does have a little bit to prove. It's not out of the question that the German Derby winner, Fantastic Moon, comes here, and we have seen German raiders, of course, be very successful with Torquato Tasso 2 years ago, and could Fantastic Moon follow in that trend? I think he does probably have to take a big step forward here. I know the ground actually is probably going in his favour, but I'd be a bit worried about his prep because they were looking at potentially skipping this race. He does still need to be supplemented. I'd say it is 50-50 that he does turn up. If he does turn up, he'll be an interesting contender, but I do probably put him a little bit lower in the pile. Now we move on to the love of my life, of course, Bay Bridge, who stepped up to a 1.5 miles last time out in the September Stakes, won in impressive fashion in what I would call a career best performance. I know he won the Champion Stakes last year, but I think that step up to a 1.5 miles, he probably ran to around 122, 123 in my opinion there. But the way he put Candleford to bed, the way he travelled so strongly as well, he's a big stamp of a horse, he's a true galloper. He keeps relentlessly galloping them into submission. Now the one worry for me is the plan is to go to the Arc, but they may decide to go elsewhere. And what it is for me is I do think that even if the ground is on the good side, I think they should still roll the dice with him here. If you look at him last time out at Kempton, he recorded a final 3 furlong split of 35 seconds flat. Now that was actually the quickest final 3 furlongs on the card that day. And the Sweet Serenius Stakes, the Group 3 contest over 6 furlongs, which was run by Starlust, was also on the same card. So he clearly has that turn of foot. He clearly has that staying ability. I think he is a little bit more ground versatile. I know he has that high knee action. He gets through that ground, but I do actually think the ground could be perfect for him. He's at the 14-1 mark at the moment. I'd say that is a very fair price. Of course, you're looking from an Ante-Post angle, so if he does skip the race, you're going to probably be, well, you're going to definitely be losing out on your stake there. But I do think Bay Bridge, look, he's related to Natalina, who won over 2 miles. He's definitely going to stay. The question is, will he be able to show that turn of foot again in this company? I think he, of course, he's very unexposed over this 1.5 miles. I think it'd be a travesty if he chooses to go to the Champion Stakes instead because of the ground, because I do think he can handle the ground. I think there is going to be enough juice in the ground for him, and I do think he's a massive player. I'm trying to speak from my head rather than my heart because, of course, I am a huge Bay Bridge fan, but I think he does have most of the bases covered, and I'd be surprised if he goes off a double figure price on the day if we have good to soft ground. And then we have the Japanese raider, who was second in the Takarazuka Kinen behind none other than Equinox, the filly through 7 Seas, who came from the back of the field that day. She did have plenty of trouble in running. I know Equinox did as well, but if you take that form literally, she should not be a 20-1 chance. I mean, she clearly has that turn of foot. The conditions, of course, are going to be the big worry. She'll want good ground, but looking at the weather over in France, it looks like she could potentially get that. But through 7 Seas, I'm not going to say I'm a master on Japanese form, but she did look very impressive when winning a Group 3. Then went and finished second to Equinox. If she does take a step forward, I think she'll need a kind of a slow pace to go off and show that turn of foot. But if she does, I reckon Ace Impact will probably have the better over the two. But through 7 Seas, you wouldn't be surprised if the ground does turn up good on the day, that she does run a big race. But is she good enough to win? I'm not too sure. You then, of course, have Onesto, Plastic Carousel, and Frankie Dettori's last Arc mount, Free Wind, who I don't think will be there at the business end. I think this is probably going to revolve around the front of the market. So for a quick fire 1, 2, 3 in this year's Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, I think Ace Impact is going to be the one to beat. The lack of a real pace angle there makes me think his turn of foot and his ability to stay out a mile and a half will come to the fore. He may not see it out as strongly as a few of the others, like Hukum, like Westover. I don't think this will be too much of a stamina-laden contest, and I do think Ace Impact will win this year's Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. In second, I'm going to put the beloved Bay Bridge at 14-1. I think he's a cracking each-way bet at this moment in time, providing he runs. I really hope they do decide to send him over there on Friday to Chantilly, where he's going to have a canter before the race on Sunday. I think he's very versatile with regards to ground and trip. He showed that ability that he can travel. He showed that ability of a turn of foot, and of course he can stay as well. So I do think Bay Bridge is going to be bang there at the finish. And third, more from a price point of view than anything, I think Westover shouldn't be so much of a bigger price than Hukum. He's very versatile, as is Bay Bridge. I'd put a few of these horses this year all in the same bracket of being able to be versatile over a mile and a half on all kinds of ground, and Westover is definitely that. He won the Grand Prix de Saint Cloud in very good time. He then came to the King George on softer ground and still managed to be beaten only ahead. I think he's going to be there at the finish. So the 1, 2, 3 for me is Ace Impact, Bay Bridge, and of course Westover. And that's it. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back in a couple of days for our full weekend preview. Do leave below who you think is going to win this year's Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, and also if you have another nap for the weekend that people can be able to get on earlier. But make sure you like and follow. Do subscribe if you are new, and we will see you in a couple of days.